Welcome to another special episode of The Authority File. I'm your host, Bill Mickey. We've lately been featuring episodes of The Authority File recorded during the ACRL conference in Cleveland in April. This episode continues that series. Basically, we thought it would be fun to set up a mobile studio next to the Choice booth in the exhibit hall and talk to our guests right out in the open. It was great to be able to do this in a public setting and speak to our guests face-to-face, surrounded by the buzz and activity of the show floor. And some of you even stopped by to tell us you're regular listeners, so thank you for that. This particular episode is brought to you by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or the OECD, and in it I speak with Iain Williamson from the OECD and Ryan Johnson from Georgetown University, and we talk about global perspectives on the future of work, a looming skills gap brought on by a huge surge in automation, and how the corporate sector, government agencies, and higher education can all play a role in future-proofing adult learning systems. Our conversation was inspired and informed by a recent report from the OECD called Getting Skills Right, Future-Ready Adult Learning Systems. So, here's me welcoming our guests from the great city of Cleveland during the 2019 ACRL conference. Hello, everybody. This is Bill Mickey, the host of The Authority File and the editorial director here at Choice. This episode is being recorded live on the show floor at the ACRL 2019 conference in Cleveland. Joining me here at the Choice booth are Iain Williams of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Hi, Iain.
Hey, how you doing, Bill?
I'm good, thank you. And Ryan Johnson is here of Georgetown University. Hello, Ryan.
Good morning.
Good morning. So today we're going to discuss the future of work and the current mismatch between workers' skills and the demands of the labor market. We'll be drawing on a recent OECD report called Getting Skills Right, Future-Ready Adult Learning Systems. The report points out that that artificial intelligence, digitalization, globalism, and an aging population are changing the nature of work and the skills needed of the workforce. It evaluates the future readiness of each member country's adult learning systems and offers comprehensive policy suggestions to address the changing nature of work. But before we get too deep into the subject, Iain, maybe you could give us a little background on the OECD and the report itself.
Okay, well, sure, absolutely, happy to. So, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, is actually an international government organization, and so just like the United Nations, it's a treaty organization, so each of our member nations actually signs on to be part of the group, and they will contribute data and learnings, and then also staff and develop council members to work with our experts on particular subjects and topical areas. And we actually cover everything from education to trade to governance, and it's all policy focused, and the main mission statement for the OECD is to create better policies for better lives. So the whole focus there is to say, okay, let's share and see what we've got.
Right.
One of the major issues, and we cover a lot of policy themes, but one area that we work on is employment, labor, and skills. With what we're talking about here with the larger workforce as a whole, AI, digitalization, globalization, and they're all playing a role in this issue around labor and skills and what we're facing in the world.
Right.
One recent publication's Getting Skills Right, which is future-ready adult learning systems, which you talked about a little bit earlier, created the PAL dashboard, which is comparing the readiness of each country's adult learning systems, testing their stress, and how are they going to be able to address these future learning skills, because there are some major changes coming down the pike, as we talked a little bit earlier. We'll get into that in a bit. But there are a lot of comparative dimensions to this, including urgency, do we have the coverage, is there flexibility in the system, so on and so forth. And this was all put together by a group led by Alicia Forte, Anja Merkhold, and Marika van der Weer from the OECD. So this is actually really important work, and we're going to be doing a lot of this over the next couple of years from a lot of our different divisions.
Right.
So
yeah. And in the report, it's kind of cool because it sort of tables out all of the participating countries' sort of readiness and quantifies sort of how they're reacting to sort of the workforce.
Yeah, there are a ton of statistics, and some of the findings are actually really interesting. We'll dive into them a little bit. But one of the big things that comes out of it is that the labor market now is having trouble filling positions and getting skills needed for the work that they're actually embarking upon now, and that is only going to exacerbate over time.
Exactly. Right. So before we dive into some of those details, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about sort of the context of put the report in a little bit more context. Why was it necessary?
Okay.
How is the global workforce changing in ways that are putting more pressure on education and skills development and training? Is it all technological or?
No, but automation technology, it's a really big part of it. So one of the things that is kind of known is that over the next 10 to 20 years, 14% of the workforce, or the jobs in the workforce now, are going to become automated.
14%.
Yeah. Now that is, you never quite know exactly what it is, but that's a pretty solid indication of where we're going to be.
Right.
But that's not what's really the secondary problem here. What is also happening is that another 32% of jobs are going to change in a very profound manner. Right, which means our skills are going to have to change with that as well.
Right.
So while there are certain parts of our jobs that we're doing now, they might become automated, or artificial intelligence might take over, and that might actually free us up to do some other things.
Right.
But to do that, what skills we have today are going to be different than what we need tomorrow and the next day and so on.
Yeah.
And one of the things is that there are a lot of educational systems, especially in the US. The two main sources for education are institutions of higher learning, like Ryan's Georgetown. But then also employer funded skills and so on. And there's kind of a gap and a mismatch there, and there's still a lot of work that needs to be done to get us ready, people of our age, but then also our kids coming out of college right now are going to be seeing changes over the next 10, 20 years, and are they prepared?
Right.
So this is what really pushed the need to start taking a serious look at this issue.
Okay,
so,
great.
Okay.
So many countries are facing these skills challenges, and even when they perform well in one aspect, and this and the report kind of cuts out all the different, divides out all the different sort of areas where they're looking at how each country performs and sort of their skills development and workforce training and funding of all of that. That they might be performing well in one aspect, but there can always be room for improvement in some of the other areas. And really no adult learning system is perfect globally. But even so, continued learning, skills acquisition is now the norm. Students and professionals alike are at the point where, as you said, Iain, with an anticipated 14% of jobs becoming automated in the next 20 years, the continued education and skills acquisition is an ongoing necessity. So while most countries are making efforts to keep their workforces trained, there are still barriers to access to some of these programs and education. And the report goes into some detail about those barriers, and I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what they are, what some of the barriers are to adult learning in general.
Yeah, it's actually really interesting. So they would be what you might assume they would be, but mainly when you look at it, it's one of the main things for the US particularly is a financial barrier. It's a cost barrier, and a perceived cost barrier. So individuals continue to be a lot of self-funding, and it gets very, very expensive. And you and I talked about this offline before. I mean, not just for people who want to educate themselves, but with kids coming up as well, we're going to pay for our kids to go to college too. So this is a ongoing cost, and it's a financial barrier. But when we actually looked at the statistics for the US, what came out was that there are three primary reasons for the main barriers for not participating in post-secondary education and skills training. First one is shortage of time, which is work-related, which came in at 28%. Lack of financial resources came in at 16%, and then shortage of time family-related came in at 15%. So those three together actually account for three really big reasons as to why. Family time, work time, we all know how that goes. The one that I wanted to kind of look at today was more like the financial resources aspect of it, because that's actually probably the biggest barrier we face in the US, and it ties in with socioeconomic aspects too, which make it even worse. So,
So, but nevertheless, I mean, there is some funding, happening, going into these systems and programs, but what is the report telling us outside of government or corporate funding? Corporate funded training and education. I mean, who's paying for the training? Is it the individuals?
So primarily it's individuals.
Yeah.
I mean, it's training. A lot of the motivations for why you want to do continued training are to improve your career and get ahead in your career and so on.
Right.
So a lot of it is you're personally doing that, but there's also a lot of push from corporations for workers to continue to train as well.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a big difference the type of work that you're doing and the access to training that you have down the road. So really the research cites that 21% of the US population contribute personally to their education and training and continued training, while 22% cite that as a very specific barrier for them, that personal financing for them to get in. So that's a fairly big swathe of the community. But there's also a relatively high level of employer contribution to that self-funding in the terms of support or educational grants or whatever you might get from your employer. It also reflects how important that training is for those employers, but they also get to direct a lot of that training as well. So you know, direct the training, they help pay for the training, you personally do the training, and then you have kind of a system where you're actually getting to where you need to be.
Right.
And there's some issues around what we're getting now to where labor needs to be and where skills need to be.
Often employer-supported training is designed to improve productivity of the employee, where the employee may want training to move to a different kind of job or move up move up, and the employer-supported training doesn't always facilitate that. Rather, they're teaching skills so that basically you become more efficient in your job, where not all employers will offer support to say get the MBA to move up into management or develop a skill where you'd move laterally to a different division, those kind of things, because they're trained you, taught you and worked you in a division or a skill set, and they want to kind of continue to enhance that. So I think the training varies depending on the needs, but the employers often are looking to improve their own. And that's understandable.
Right.
I mean, that's understandable, but even though even employers that offer support don't often offer support that the employee might necessarily want for their long-term career goals.
Yeah, that's an excellent point.
And we know people change careers frequently now.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like 30 years ago where you had one career.
Yeah, it was cited maybe it's like 2 or 3 careers.
Yeah, we
changed
things which wasn't the way it was in our parents' time.
Yeah.
You know, but it is now, and so ways to facilitate those changes are important.
Yep. Right. And that's usually this is where higher ed would come in, or
higher ed,
vocational education. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So
all right. So the report noted also that adult learning is generally underfunded when it's compared with other educational areas. Why do you think that is?
Okay, so there's kind of a lot to unwrap in that one, because you need to go back a little bit and also look at how the lack of public funding outside of investment from unemployment training, it's not really there, and that would potentially narrow the affordability gap a little bit,
right?
But especially for disadvantaged groups, because like I said, it's not just access to finances, it's also access to training and what you're doing from a work perspective. What I will say though is that you're looking at some of the socioeconomic factors, then those really do start contributing to the gap in participation, most notably in certain areas like age, where training is significantly higher in younger professionals. So there's like this gap where you come out of school and for the first 5-10 years of your career you're more engaged in training, but when you get to your 40s and 50s you're less so, less inclined. Participation of low-skilled workers was significantly lower than high-skilled workers. So that would mean people who are potentially jobs that are going to be automated, so factory jobs, shop foreman, milling, that kind of thing, they may be ready to change, but the problem is that group of workers doesn't necessarily have access to the kind of skills training that's going to be in demand in 5, 10, 15 years from now. So that transition is going to be a little bit harder for them as well. And those are areas where like education systems and public funding in the form of grants or tax breaks for the individual or the employer would actually come into play to help with that in some degree.
Right.
And then unemployed worker training is significantly lower in this country than a lot of others. But what still maintains to be the primary motivation for doing training and continuing your education. And I think some of us kind of get wrapped up, I know myself get wrapped up in that, don't have time, don't necessarily have the financial resources to do it, is the reasons why we would do it in the first place. And primarily, the first one by far and away is people actually want to do their job better at the end of the day. And that is, it improves their career prospects, quite frankly. They want to increase their knowledge and skills on a subject of interest. Like you were talking about, the employee training, employer training might be very focused on productivity, but you might want to learn more and different things outside of that. And then a lot of people actually also feel obliged to. So me, for example, I have to go through 2 to 3 training courses every single year for work. It's a requirement of being at the OECD, continued skills training. So I took a grammar course this year, advanced writing for grammar. And I thought it was interesting, it was useful for me, and I was interested in doing it. So, you know, the 2 leading providers of these education systems, though, are employers through private corporations. Well, there are many of them. And then there's also your higher education institutions. And quite frankly, I think they're more on the front line for that transitional training, and then actually having the systems in place to actually provide training as they go forward, and providing value for the cost of the education that you have to partake in. So, sorry.
Would you agree with that, Ryan? I mean, what are your opinions on sort of where the responsibility lies in offering that continuing education and training opportunities at government, corporate, higher ed, individual, all of those?
Well, I think there is a particular role for the government in this, and for state-sponsored education. I mean, Georgetown is a private institution. It's fairly elite, but we do have, for example, the School of Continuing Studies, which really focuses on providing professional master's degrees for people who are looking to improve. I mean, we have a whole school that does that. The students are almost entirely part-time students who work full-time. Most of them have their tuition, my understanding is most of them have their tuition paid by their employers, so a lot of them do, including a lot of government workers. A lot of their student bodies, government workers. But particularly when you move away from those kind of elite private institutions, there's lots of room in that for the state schools. I think the state community colleges have taken a really important role in this. And you look at the size and growth of some of them. Some of these are huge. I mean, I just, you know, Nova in Northern Virginia has campuses in a number of cities and has literally tens of thousands of students. Georgia Perimeter outside Atlanta had 60,000 students as a community college. These are where most of them are adult learners. I think there's a big space for that, then there's a big need for that. One of the problems, there was an article in the Chronicle last year that talks about education deserts. So these are places where it's 60 miles to the nearest school, the nearest higher education thing. And if you're working, 60 miles is way too far. And so there's large portions of this country where even if you wanted to go back to school, there's no way to do that in person. And so I think there's other models we'll talk about later for this. But there's a great space for higher education at all levels to get involved in this and to provide skill training and advanced degrees and kind of help workers or individuals improve their skills, improve their career prospects, add value to their work. I mean, which is the way you get raises and make more money is by it. Rather, it's all an economic institution. So.
I mean, do you think there could be some more coordination between government, education, and sort of the corporate market to sort of organize the training and the workforce training more collaboratively, or?
Sure. One of the things I think it would be great if there was a way for, say, government financial aid to be organized in such a way as to help facilitate and pay for this. To say an expansion of Pell Grants to help pay for particularly people who are going to school part-time and you know, and for more money so it covers full cost of this education, which reduces the impact of student loans, which drags down. So I think if there was that's one possibility, but I think whether it be the state governments or the federal government, I think there is room for government support of this, as well as the development of programming within the education systems to facilitate it as well. So I think it comes both ways.
Good. So financing alone can't solve the whole issue, though? I mean, equity, inclusiveness, as you mentioned, Iain, is one success factor. Another could be market alignment. I mean, what else might contribute to that?
Oh, okay. So, when you're kind of looking at this, the idea of equity and inclusiveness, those are huge, right? And I think this one is one of those things where you need to look at the impact and you need to look at the results and the data that's coming from this and actually see what's been really effective. But the other part could be market alignment. And what I mean by that is, and this is more of a thought, not necessarily in the report per se, but you have companies like LinkedIn are doing LinkedIn U, which are like small course sets and so on. And then Ryan's going to talk a little bit about certificating and being ready for the skill set. I think there is an opportunity, and especially when you start looking at these online colleges and these places where you get into the desert, and be able to provide education, where there can actually be some really strong collaboration between corporations to really talk with the higher education institutions. So that essentially they're saying, okay, this is what we're going to need 5, 10, 20 years from now. This is the kind of skills that we're going to need. Are they soft skills? Are they really technical skills? Is it a mix of both? Once those two start working together, then the value of the education the individual is paying for actually is going to reap more of a benefit, right? So the idea is that, okay, we might spend several $100,000s on an education and come out with that debt. But if you don't have the skill sets and you don't have the ability to go work and start paying that down, or have an equitable value for the cost of that education at the end of the day, that's kind of continues to be a problem. And I think that this is my personal opinion, not OECD. I don't think that until all three of these institutions or pillars are in line, then this is not going to be necessarily a solvable problem. And that's what the Powell report kind of points out, is that you're good in one area, the other, not all three. We've got to work to get all three kind of going forward. So I know I think we're also kind of wrapping time. So
in fact, we're going to segue right into that. So Ryan, if you want to talk a little bit more about some of the options for continued career education via higher ed, whether it's early or mid-career. Are there any government, private scholarship opportunities or financial support for disadvantaged groups in particular?
Here's a couple of examples I think of this. In the state of Georgia, for example, they have a whole system of technical colleges, which offer dual enrollment with high school students, so that when the student graduates from high school, they also have a certificate in the trade. I mean, they also have an academic thing that helps people into colleges, but I find it's really interesting with the certificate of trade. So when you graduate from high school, you have your certificate to be an auto mechanic, a chef, an electrician.
So you're ready to go right into
the workforce. The high school diploma is essential, but the certificate is as well. Similarly, you see these kind of online schools that offer computer training and things, but they're really focused on certificates. If you don't have a Microsoft, an Oracle, Adobe certificate, it's really hard to get a job in IT. And so the degree programs have to offer the certificating process in that. You have a degree in accounting without the CPA exam being part of that. You're limited, your career prospects are severely limited by the fact that you don't have the exam. So I think, it's all up and down the level where the certificate is becoming really, really important in many, many professions. And so the education process has to include that certificate as part of that. And I think that's
actually, no, I wanted to add to that, actually. One of the things that came out of the report was the notion that there's foundational knowledge that is needed right now, right? And so that foundational knowledge to us has always been numeracy, literacy. Well, it's becoming a reality that technology, certificating, these kind of skills are now becoming considered foundational knowledge. You go apply for a job, if you don't know your full suite of Office products, it's foundational knowledge. You have to have it.
So it's reading, writing, arithmetic, and technology.
And technology now. And thank God that's for the next generation, because I struggle with my iPhone anyway. But that's the idea. Sorry, but I wanted to reinforce that.
Well, and the other piece of this, I think the other where higher ed is changing is there's a market for online learning. And a lot of traditional universities have tried it and are still doing it a lot. But there are some really big examples of places who have made that their focus. University of Maryland University College was one of the first. They were doing it kind of when it was correspondence courses before technology. or the American Military University, or Western Governors, or Phoenix, or Southern New Hampshire, or Liberty, or there's a whole series of them, and there's some more trying to get into that marketplace, but they really meet the needs of students who are in deserts, or who can't sit in a class 3 days a week, or for 4 hours in one night, or whatever the schedule is, but it allows the student to self-schedule.
Yeah.
You can, so while your kids are taking a nap, you can do your schoolwork. I mean, it becomes in many ways asynchronous, and it really facilitates the needs of the student. And I think the nice thing about the higher ed market is there's room for all of these different players. There's room for the community colleges who are working for a particular clientele. There's room for the tentpole kind of elite, the big state schools who have the traditional on-campus experience. There's the online schools that offer a very different experience. I think there's room for this, and so for a student, you could literally pick all three at the same time in some ways. I mean, you can take classes, in different places as it meets your need, or as your circumstances change. You start school, and so many students. I mean, before Georgetown, I worked at the University of Mississippi, and retention was an important issue because many students had limited financial needs, and they were often not able to finish because of those. But then they could transfer to some other entity to finish the degree, or the university was trying to find ways to help them to finish the degree in different ways. And so it becomes, I think, higher education as a whole industry needs to be incredibly flexible to meet the student need, because there is no one model anymore.
Right.
As there was. So.
Okay, excellent. Iain and Ryan, before we go, though, I just want to, if you could, Iain, let us know where we can get that report if we're interested.
Pretty much everything the OECD produces writ large is available on the OECD iLibrary, and it is free to read. We also have our stats and our data portals as well, so it's stats.oecd.org and data.oecd.org. But to actually read the full report, go to oecd-iLibrary.org and look up the title, which, hold on, sorry, I'm going to have to go right back to the top of it, but it's Getting Skills Right, Future-Ready Adult Learning Systems. And this was published just this February, so that's where you can actually get into the content and actually read the publication. And it's not that heavy of a read. It's very interesting when you start digging into it.
No, it absolutely is, right, yeah.
Which kind of surprised me. I was actually really sinking my teeth into it.
Yeah.
And then just in general, the OECD overall, I mean, we do a lot of work in a lot of different areas, and the future of work is going to be a huge focus for us over the next couple of years. You'll see a lot of campaigns coming out from us focused in that area. We'll be doing things like this, hopefully more often. And the idea is we're also going to do a big summit in September in DC for about 300 young professionals and college students to get together and really talk about the issue and give their perspective on the issue, which is some people aren't listening to their perspective, or in some cases lack thereof, because they're not aware of what they're stepping into. Right. So it's going to be a really interesting conversation. But the other thing is you can also, as I said, go to the OECD library, or if you need anything at all, or any of the people listening need anything, have any questions, feel free to reach out to me directly. I can be found on OECD iLibrary. My contact information is in the About page for North America. Myself and then Danny Ryan, who is my associate over in Washington, be happy to help. And go visit.
Right. Excellent. Well, Iain, Ryan, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it. You just heard from Iain Williamson from the OECD and Ryan Johnson from Georgetown University. This concludes another episode from our series recorded live from the exhibit hall floor at the 2019 ACRL conference held in Cleveland, Ohio. You can find all of the episodes of The Authority File on your favorite podcast app or on our website, choice360.org. Just click on the librarianship dropdown. On choice360.org, you'll also find information on Choice's entire product platform, including Choice Reviews, CC Advisor, Choice webinars, resources for college libraries, our white papers, and a whole lot more. A great way to keep up with the Authority File is to join the Choice Authority File Facebook group, which you can access via the Choice Reviews Facebook page. As a member of the group, you can give us feedback, suggest podcast participants, chat with other listeners, and submit new topic ideas. Sponsorship and advertising for the Authority File podcast are handled by Choice's advertising manager Pam Marino, and the production and editing are done by Choice's digital media specialist Mark Dirks. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.